We installed a $250 junkyard high top onto our 4x4 van, turning it into a camping machine. It's been about a year since we did the installation. We've driven across the country and back, did over 1,000 miles off-road, and we figured it's finally time to share with you just how we DIY high topped our camper van. Now before you go back in time, I want to mention that there's an article on our website which is completely free that accompanies this video, so be sure to check that out for more information. And if you have a question that's not answered in the video, just leave me a comment and I'll get back with you. Right, made it up here to Brooks Autos in Oilville, Virginia, basically just northwest of Richmond. I'm excited about how flat the roof is. It'll be nice for solar. Good morning, y'all. We made it all the way back to Florida to the shop with the $250 junkyard fine top. Now this is a 24-inch riser. It's fiberglass. If you've looked into these brand new, they're $5 to $7 grand. There's only a couple companies that do them, so pretty expensive. So saved quite a bit of cash going to a junkyard. I did have to drive all the way to Virginia to get it, but that's just where it was located at. Unfortunately though, the junkyard, literally after I told them I wanted it, was moving a car and bumped it. So it's got a little bit of fiberglass damage, but nothing too crazy. And then they had trouble getting the top off, so they literally just cut it off. Like, this is the metal from the van still. You see it? I mean, if you look at the front, they still have the windshield attached. Look at this. That's the windshield. They just like sawzalled all the way around it and cut the pillars. So yesterday we spent a couple of hours getting the interior. So this had like two parts to it. This shell right here on the ground was the ceiling in there. So the top on the trailer is upside down. And basically the ceiling was in there. Well, the way they installed this thing, because Conner lines didn't come high topped, it seems like they installed the ceiling first, like they cut the roof van out, the ceiling of the metal van out, put the ceiling in because all the screws went from the outside in, and then they glued the exterior top, which is the portion that I want, like from the outside. So it was really tough getting all of these out, all like the little screws. We had to punch them, and then we had to get a crowbar in there, and we ended up not being able to save it. We didn't want the fiberglass ceiling anyways. It leaves like a big gap, and we had no need for it. But I don't think we would have been able to save it if we wanted to. Luckily, we only want the high top portion, and this thing appears to be pretty much glued on. It's gonna be tough though. Using a multi-tool with a flat scraper bit, I went around between the fiberglass topper and the metal, and we used the electric winch to actually pull up on the metal to apply constant pressure as I went around the edges with the multi-tool and kind of cut the sealant that was in between the two. There was a ton of glue, so it was pretty tedious. Just a long, slow process, but the constant pressure was definitely key. Now this is one of those steps that if you bought a brand new topper, you could save yourself from doing, but obviously we saved a lot of money buying a junkyard topper versus buying a brand new one, so we have to go through this step. If you bought yours at a junkyard like me, or you're taking it off of an old van or something like that, you are gonna have to go through this step. What I'm doing is I'm cleaning up the topper, so I'm getting off the old sealant so that we can clean it up and get it ready for new sealant to go on. So we'll have a nice, good bond between the fiberglass topper and the actual metal roof of the van. To start things out, I used a oscillating tool or a multi-tool. This essentially is just a blade that goes back and forth. Now this is a scraper bit, kind of like a spatula, right? Or a putty knife. All it does is go back and forth. It's really nice for these flat surfaces. Be careful not to get the corners dug in because you can, cut into the fiberglass if you're not careful, and also use it on a slower setting. So moving this right along the edge, this was excellent for the rear of our topper because there was a bunch of sealant back there where it had some taller doors on the outside of the topper. So that was killer for this. But on the inside, we're using an abrasive wheel on a drill. This is just a nylon abrasive wheel, basically kind of like a wire wheel. We're kind of even thinking of it as sandpaper. Essentially what I'm doing is I'm scraping or I'm sanding off all the old sealant, any dirt, debris, nastiness, basically. And I'm also sanding it a little bit, which is gonna make our sealant that we put on much better. I'll tell you, if you never used one of these before, you wanna put some light pressure, keep it moving. And don't get a wire wheel, get one that's actually nylon like this. They're relatively inexpensive. A lot of times they come in a pack, especially if you get them at Harbor Freight like this one. So if you keep it in one spot, it will eat right through the fiberglass, or it will cause a big groove in there. So just keep that in mind. You can even, try it on like an area that you're not gonna have to use later, maybe some parts that came off the interior, if you got a shell like we did, or something like that where it's not gonna be seen. You can try this first to kind of see how it works. But keep it moving. And my other tip is have it spin in a direction that is not gonna catch on the lip. So I'm doing this part down here where it's actually gonna meet the metal in the drip rail. And so I'm holding it like this essentially, and I have it spinning in a downward direction as I'm pulling it backwards. What that does is it throws all the debris out here. It's letting me get in there, really nicely. And then it's not catching the lip. If I had it running backwards, like this direction, it would try to catch that, jam the tool in here. And it would also probably, damage this fine edge over here where it's gonna meet the metal topper. So just pay attention to what direction you have it running and take your time. We're cleaning up this little lower ledge, and I gotta clean up this really big fat contour ledge as well, because a lot of the sealant was up in here, and it also has a lot of dirt and debris. So once we get this done, we'll come back and actually clean it, with some soap and water. Then we'll come back with some alcohol to get any oil residue or anything like that out. Once it's nice, good and dry, we'll actually be able to put this on the van, use some sealant, and put it on there permanently. With the fiberglass shell finally free of what was left of the old van, it was pretty light and easy to carry around. So I took it over to a local fiberglass guy and had him repair the small amount of damage that was done to it like the day before I picked it up by the junkyard. So had that fixed, but while that was getting repaired, I moved on to getting the van prepared to put the top on it. So I took the old build that was in there that the original owner did, removed all of that so it was easier to get around in there. We were gonna do our own build out anyways, and I went ahead and took the cargo rack and everything off of the roof, essentially getting the van ready for the topper. I'm gonna go ahead and show you how to drop this headliner up here. It's pretty simple to do so, and at some point you're gonna need to do it when you're doing your build. These are just Phillips head screws, so pretty simple. Take that down. This is a 5.5 millimeter hex head socket. You're gonna need a 1/4 inch socket or something that's thin wall. Just go ahead and put that on there and loosen that up. And there's 3 of these little screws need to come out. Now along the back, there are 4 push pins. There is a special tool to get underneath here so you don't damage them to get them out, properly. But I'll be honest, I typically use a pair of needle nose pliers. But since our headliner is exposed right here, I can actually just pull the whole headliner down and then push the pin out from the back side. These kind of look like a big washer, with a Christmas tree. So as these get more and more damaged, you'll have to replace them. So it's not a big deal. They're very cheap. They come in different colors. You can find them pretty much anywhere, especially online. And all they do is push in or pull out. So we're gonna go ahead and take these down. There's 3, and here's 4. This just clips into this little part. You can see there's some little clips along the front. Pretty simple. Once you get that down, we're gonna go ahead and pull the whole headliner down. You should be able to unplug it right here with yours. If not, then what you can do is simply the gray interior portion unclips right here. Pretty simple. To unclip that little plastic piece, and then it fits through this hole. So I'm just gonna feed it back up through here out of the way. So this is out of the way for us to pull the whole headliner out. So move that over there. And now you can see it's pretty much just a piece of cardboard that they cover in carpet. And that's what the headliner essentially is. Not much to it. All right, so now that the van is prepared for the top to go on it and the top is ready to actually go on the van, the first thing we want to do is test fit this. Now, if you've never bought anything that's fiberglass before or comes out of a mold, sometimes it's not always perfect. We got lucky and found the topper from a 2006, and we have a 2006, and the extended body vans for the Econolines are supposed to be the same after 92 or 93, if I'm not mistaken. So it should fit, but you just never know. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna test fit it. That way we don't cut a big giant hole in our van and end up with a topless van. Now, I do want to point out that we're lucky enough to have a small electric winch mounted in the ceiling at the shop. So just the 2 of us were able to accomplish this, but Remember that the fiberglass topper is very lightweight. Elise and I carried it around with no problem. So if you had 3 or 4 friends with a couple of ladders, you could accomplish the same thing. Obviously, it's nice to have the electric winch. We just used a board in the middle. Elise supported it from the rear. We backed in, was able to drop it down. The main thing that we were looking for is that it was going to be the proper length all the way from front to rear. It was the proper width, so it was going to sit nice in like the little rub rail at the top, or the drip rail at the top, I should call it, and that the front cap was going to be nice and rounded and match the actual van itself. So after checking it out, we decided it was good to go and moved on to actually cutting the metal roof off the van, the scary part. It is time to drill some holes in the roof. My first tip for you is use a metal drill bit, unless you want to use 4 or 5 wood drill bits and spend more money, but use a metal drill bit. Also use some eye protection. The squinties are great until you get metal in your eye. If you're like me, I've done that enough times to where I just use eye protection because it sucks getting it out of there. So use some eye protection, use a metal bit. And you may be wondering, well, why are we drilling the holes? Well, we're doing this so we have guidelines on the roof. You can't really see these cross braces when you're up on the roof. And so what we're going to do is we're going to drill some holes along the edge and then along the front where we're going to stop so we don't cut too far forward. And we're going to do the same at the back so we don't cut too far back. Now, depending on how your build goes, you may want to use some of the roof, for like building cabinets or something like that. We're actually going to leave the upper part over the driver's area, one for crashes, it's going to be much stronger, and then also because we're going to have storage over that area. So the front of our build will have storage, but we're not going to have uppers over our bed in the rear. Some people like to have uppers back there, so you may want to leave like the cross brace in the rear there. For us, we're going to cut all the cross braces except for the front one. So just get you a little metal drill bit, get you some eye protection, figure out where you want to cut first, because it's much harder to try to add this metal back on later than it is to cut it and then take a little bit more off as you go. So kind of figure out what you're going to do before you cut the whole roof off. But let's get going. With our plan in place, I drilled pilot holes right along the back of the front cross member, just above the driver and passenger seat, to keep that front area. I then moved to the back of the van where we had already taken measurements and marked out where we wanted to put our pilot holes. I drilled those. I then moved to the outside roof of the van and used a straight edge and a permanent marker to connect the pilot hole dots to make a straight line. Now, I used a step bit to make the hole slightly larger to actually fit the tool down in there. The tool that I used to cut the sheet metal is referred to as a sheet metal nibbler. It's actually just a drill attachment. It worked fantastic, and I'll link it in the article for you. But basically, we cut from the back of the van or to the front of the van on the sides, just outside of the little dip that's up there, the most outer kind of channel or dip that's up there. So we just followed that crease right along the edge. So I just finished cutting probably 90–95% of the roof. That little drill attachment worked awesome, especially for the passenger and the driver's side, like the long cuts. It also worked great for us along the back because we cut behind, just behind where these little channels are in the roof. However, in the front, once the tool got down into the channel, it would work down in there, but I couldn't get it back out of it. So I ended up having to like kind of do one of these scenarios, and I got frustrated and ended up just going to the reciprocating saw, which worked just fine. Speaking of the reciprocating saw, that is a step I'm on now, but I just want to mention that whatever you use to cut the roof, just be careful if it's something that shoots sparks. So if you're using like a grinder with a cutoff wheel, for example, any of those sparks, if they hit the glass, it will pit and damage the glass. So you want to protect all of your glass if you're going to use like a cutoff wheel or something like that. That was the first time I used that little attachment, and it worked perfectly. It worked exactly how I wanted it to. It cut the roof, but it didn't cut the actual cross braces, which is the step I'm on now. So what I'm going to do is just jam a piece of wood in here. There we go. Just to give myself a little bit more room to work. And then I'll come back with a metal blade, of course, and cut the actual cross braces out. Let's get going. Moving over to the driver's side, you can see there's some wiring on this side. So obviously you don't want to damage your wiring. Now you may want to go ahead and just pull this down. It's pretty simple. It just has little push pins, kind of like the headliner did. So all you gotta do is pull it out of those little locations. Starting to get tight about right here because there's a little push pin. Just work the pin out and now that section's down. Now I can safely get in here with a saw and I'm not gonna damage my wiring. Well, I finally popped the top of the roof and it's so cool to actually be able to stand up in here and walk around. I do want to mention that getting the sheet metal roof off, it's pretty lightweight. So 2 people wearing some gloves, you can pick it up and toss it off. I recommend the gloves so you don't cut yourself on the sheet metal that is sharp. Speaking of that, the edges around the van are going to be sharp. So you're going to need to be, paying attention to them and be careful. What we did was we took a file, went through, and anything that was really sharp, we filed it. And then we came back with some sandpaper to rough up the edges so we could, get some of the paint that was flaking when we sanded back, essentially to get some good adhesion because we want to paint. We want to paint all this bare metal so that way it doesn't rust in the future. Even though you're never going to see it, we still want to go ahead and paint it to protect it. Now we're just going to use some Rust-Oleum from the local hardware store and we're actually going to paint brush it on because you're never going to see it. And painting with a brush is much simpler than masking a bunch of stuff off and coming through with spray paint. So that's what we're going to do next. Essentially, we sanded around the edges as well, basically where the fiberglass topper is going to sit on it because you can't put sealant directly on like a high gloss paint. It's not going to stick. You're going to need to sand it. So that's what we did. We sanded it with a 60 grit all the way front to back on the passenger and driver side where the topper is going to sit on it. And then we cleaned it afterwards. So once we do our painting and that dries, and then we'll come back and actually lay down the sealant and then put the fiberglass top back on it.
Hey, no standing up at the topper first. No, I'm gonna get in there.
Once we got the metal roof cut all the way off and prepped and ready to go, we put the fiberglass topper up here one more time so we could align it exactly where we wanted it. I have to say, once the metal was off, it was so much easier because you can just literally move the topper around from the inside instead of trying to do it from ladders, and just much easier to work with. You're probably gonna need a few people to get it up there at first before you have the roof cut out. But once the roof is cut out, it's not as bad to actually get the topper up here and move it around because you can physically stand up in the van to move it, which is really, really nice. Now, once we figured out exactly where we wanted it, we actually had to use a couple of clamps to kind of pull in the sides so that it would sit exactly how we wanted it to along the actual body of the van. So we figured that all out. Once we got it sitting where we wanted, I used some fasteners to hold it in place. That's exactly how the topper was actually on the old van that it came off of, and it was on there for, what, more than 15 years. So we basically did exactly how it was on there, except for they used 10 to 12 screws, and we used right at 20. We used a combination of 2.5 inch and 2 inch screws to come from the bottom up through the metal and then into the fiberglass. And essentially we did that around the entire van. Once we got those done, which I just drilled a pilot hole, like a smaller hole with a drill bit, then came through with the actual screws and put them through. But once we got that all done and we knew, okay, this is where the actual topper is going to sit, then we came back with the permanent marker and made ourselves some reference points. We marked both the topper and the metal itself in various locations around the van. So that way, when we actually put the topper on, we can just use those reference points to align it. It's obviously much easier to work on the topper while it's not on the van. So I highly recommend that you go ahead and use your painter's tape to tape it off while it's down there before you put it up on the topper for its final time. Once we got the topper up here and aligned it exactly where we wanted it, we went ahead and did some painter's tape on the body as well. What you're trying to achieve here is when you put the adhesive on and the topper meets the van, you might get some sealant or some adhesive that squishes out, and that's what the tape is going to be there for, to catch any of that. Plus, once you're done with the inside and you move to the outside, you need to apply some adhesive out here. The painter's tape is going to let you get a really nice clean line, similar to what it would if you're caulking a bathroom or you're doing some painting projects somewhere else. Apparently I lost the footage where he patched the spot over the doors because the original van had high doors, so let me just talk about that real quick. The original junkyard donor van had high top doors in the rear, and we were not going to be putting those onto our van, so we had to figure out a way to cover up that big hole in the back where the doors used to be. Now, when I sent the fiberglass top to the fiberglass repair guy to fix the front damage from the junkyard, I also had him cover up the third brake light in the rear, but I didn't know how we were going to patch that big hole because it needed to match up with the roof line in the rear. What we did was we waited until we actually had the topper on the van with the roof cut out. We had it secured down, we had marked it out, we knew it wasn't going to move, we knew the placement of it. Then we made a cardboard template of the piece that was going to fit into the big open area in the rear. We used a big piece of fiberglass that was left over from the ceiling that we had cut out, cut that to the size of our template, and essentially glued it from the inside out. Once the reference points were made, we actually backed out all the fasteners, lifted up the top, and put them on two 2x4s. So we put the 2x4s standing vertically, and they were running perpendicular to the van. So they were running across the van, so the topper could just sit on those 2x4s. Once they were sitting on those, we went through and cleaned one last time just to make sure all of our surfaces were good and prepped before we started applying some adhesive. Now, we used 3M 5200 black. We actually ordered 6 tubes and ended up needing 9 total. 1 just for the patch in the rear, which I'll talk about in a minute. But we do have an extended van, so I would tell you go ahead and order at least 8 tubes. And if you get it online, we'll put a link in the description below. It'll also be in the article. It's a little bit cheaper than buying it locally like West Marine or something. But if you do run out, you might be able to go to your local boating store and pick some up, just pay a little bit heavier price for it. Once the majority of the adhesive is applied around the metal roof of the van, we still have to conquer those 4 spots where the 2x4s are sitting. So we lifted the rear first, used a cabinet jack to hold it, pulled out the 2x4, cleaned the area, put down the adhesive, and then lowered the rear of the camper first. We just found that that worked best for us. Then we did the same thing with the front. We pulled out the board, cleaned it, sealed it, and then we dropped down the front. Once we had the actual topper sitting on the van with the adhesive in between it, we made our little bit of tweaks that we needed to line up our reference points, and then we put our fasteners back through to hold it in place. That worked out really well. I do want to mention that the 3M 5200, it does need to be above 70 degrees outside when you're doing it, and also below 50% humidity. And you do have about a 30-minute window or so. So when you start putting the adhesive down on the metal, you got about 30 minutes before you really need to mate that topper to it. Otherwise, it's going to start to tack up and get hard on you, and it's not going to seal properly. So basically, you want to make sure that you're ready to go with all of this before you start doing it. You don't want to do a little bit. You need to do this whole thing at once. Now, after we put the fasteners through, we had a lot of gap all around, just like the topper did prior that it was on it. So we used a lot more 3M 5200 to fill in all of the spaces all the way around so we couldn't see any daylight. This is where the tape that we had already applied on the outside really came in clutch. Yeah, so that was pretty much for the inside. Let's go ahead and move to the outside and talk about finishing that up. Now for the outside of the van, you guessed it, more 3M 5200. Honestly, we wish we had an electric caulking gun. Between doing the inside and the seams in there, which required a lot, and the outsides, we were definitely getting tired of squeezing the caulking gun, but that's all right. That's just kind of how it goes sometimes. But doing the painter's tape up front really made it look really nice and clean and professional. We simply just peeled off the painter's tape after we ran our finger along to make sure it was pushed into the seam and was nice and smooth. We just peeled off the painter's tape while it was still wet, and it turned out great. Now on the back of the van, where we patched that hole where the tall doors were on the original top, we used white 5200 simply because we ran out of black, and that's what we were able to get locally. Since our van was silver from the factory, we paid a professional company to actually wrap the fiberglass topper for us. We went with a nicer quality wrap instead of going with a cheaper one, and we paid someone to do it. So it did cost us $750, so you could save some money there. But honestly, it looks fantastic. It almost matches perfectly. In fact, no one ever notices the fact that it's not painted. When we tell people that we high-topped it ourselves and they ask questions about it, they ask about the paint, and we tell them it's wrapped, and they're blown away. And I gotta say, after a year of traveling in it, it still looks fantastic, especially for a 2006 camper van. We've lived in it for over a year, been across the country and back. It still looks awesome. We love that we can stand up and walk around in it, and we wouldn't have done it any other way. Now, if you're wondering how I actually found the topper at a junkyard, I'll be doing an entire video on that because I started to put it in this one, but it was pretty in-depth. It was making the video pretty long, and it's kind of a long video already. So be on the lookout for that. If you liked it, show me by giving me a thumbs up. Consider buying me a beer, and don't forget there's that free article on the website if you need more information, or you can leave a comment. I'd be happy to answer it for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.